Awesome. Thank you so much. Apologies, everybody. I'm on site training one of our partners, and unfortunately, Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. So having some Wi-Fi difficulties on site here. But glad to meet everybody. My name is Jordan Wazwaz. I'm a sales engineer here at Nerdio. Let you know a little bit about myself. Let you know kind of my perspective and where my experience is, and kind of how I came to be where I'm at today. Started at an MSP myself, almost 9 years ago. And then worked through the help desk, worked through the ranks, and became an Azure engineer. Started working then with Azure and AVD, and found that I was having a hard time doing things myself. So started looking at Nerdio, and here I am. So hoping I have the knowledge and kind of the same lens, come with a lot of the similar background as a lot of the folks here on the call. So I think I'll be able to relate and really tie everything together for you. So let me. All right. So what we're here today, and I hope what you're all aware of the topic, is running an Azure Business Review. An Azure Business Review. This is a tool that we kind of created and coined here at Nerdio, or a process really. This is something where for an Azure Business Review, we. Sorry, I'm trying to fix my monitor here, and my Teams call is kind of being odd. 1 second. There we go. So an ABR is, a process that we coined at Nerdio. We found after customers would go live, they'd be working with us. They'd say, hey, Nerdio, the sales process was great. Everything looked good. The customer, you guys do a great job selling the deal. The customer comes on board, they buy in. But then sometimes, things need to be reviewed, or things need to be tweaked to really get things into a right state. And that's where that fine tuning comes in. So we found that people would come to us with the same sentiment, and then oftentimes it was the same things that we were repeating or finding that we needed to correct for partners. So that's how we put together this Azure Business Review process, and why we do this today. So some of what came out of this as we were working with people is, we found that instance sizing would sometimes need to be changed, whether that was sometimes to up or down. Maybe we quoted something a little bit too high at like a D8. And after being live for a few weeks, we found that they were over provisioned. And sometimes it's the flip side of that. Maybe we gave them a D4, but we found out that they have another group that they're going to choose. Another department's going to be virtualized. So now we need to bump up the resources a little bit. Things like that. So then we also part of this process look at auto scale. So that's one of those things where when we're first quoting this out and first helping you build out these environments for your clients, we do our best educated guess and do our best to really, again, educated guess is probably the best term, where we try and look at what we can and make that recommendation. But sometimes after being live for, again, 2 weeks, 30 days, we're really able to identify that, maybe the CEO thought that the financial person doing QuickBooks came in at 6 in the morning, but really they don't stroll until 9 a.m. And we can tailor that auto scale back a little bit. And maybe instead of starting those machines at 6 a.m., maybe we look at starting them a little bit later in the day. Reserved instances in AHB, excuse me. These are all things that we preach ever since day one here at Nerdio. This is the first thing I learned, and the thing I teach people the most is reserved instances are a must for practically any virtual machine that you're spinning up inside of Azure. Reserved instance being that 3-year commitment to Microsoft. Not as scary as it sounds, though. A reserved instance, they make you work for it a little bit, but it helps them with resource planning too. So that's committing to resources within Microsoft or within Azure for 3 years. And everybody says that they're going to take advantage of reserved instance, or not everybody, but usually when we're quoting people at Nerdio, we tell everybody take advantage, but it is an actionable item. So if you don't go into the Azure portal or into the CSP portal, so if you're direct Azure and if you're indirect, working through PaxH, SureWeb, Ingram, to make sure that you're actually tying that reserved instance to a machine, you're not going to actually reap those benefits. Same thing with the AHB. Sometimes people, again, we quote it with AHB, but unless you actually check the box during the VM deployment section, you're unfortunately not going to reap those benefits. Backup verification. This is something that, we all think is a super simple thing. And I hate to say it, but unfortunately, during our ABRs or our Azure Business Reviews, this is more common than you think, that we find that one or more, or sometimes even an entire stack isn't being backed up. Notifications and workflows. These kind of come down to really Nerdio control, or control over your portal, and then control over your actual Azure environment. So we have notifications, and you can build out actions and triggers for notifications. Anything from create a server to, once a server is created, go send an email to purchase reserved instances or Azure Hybrid benefit. And we can kind of get into that further, but notifications and workflows. I forget what it is, but it's actually a really small percentage of our partners that are utilizing workflows. But when we pull them, a large percentage, the majority are interested. So again, we'll cover that a little bit later, and hopefully we can shed some light on any of our partners that might be using Nerdio and overlooking workflows and how you can utilize those. MSP tool and maintenance automation. So this is really looking at making sure that your maintenance, your scripted actions, some of the pieces that we can use to help you save labor costs are being utilized and in place. And then that's also looking at things like app masking to make sure that, maybe there's some features to AVD or FS Logics or this, modern cloud stack that we could be utilizing to really cost optimize or performance optimize your stack further. And then lastly is removal of unused resources. If any of our partners on the line or anybody is a partner that's used our NFA product, chances are if you still have NFA, or even if you've migrated, you might have some resources out there, some old proxy servers, things like that. But even in the sense of if somebody deletes a virtual machine, you want to make sure that they deleted the NIC, that they deleted the disk, all the components that actually make up that full resource. So we've kind of broke this down into steps. And step one is really just being prepared to run your ABR. So, step one is having your quote ready. And I always recommend doing the quote and having a quote from Nerdio. Even if you don't have NMM installed, I recommend you go take a look at our free calculator on the website. We have a free version that is great. It'll really highlight, I think, what our tool does and how we make the Azure calculator, and not just the Azure calculator, but all of Azure, a lot more palatable. But having a quote ready. So we want to have something that we can compare to. One of the first things that we like to do is if you have a quote ready, a quote built out in Nerdio, then what we can do is we have a report in Nerdio called estimated versus deployed. That estimated versus deployed quote is going to go ahead and compare what we put into that quote versus what's there. And at a very quick glance, you're able to identify, hey, we quoted a terabyte premium disk, and we only gave them a terabyte HDD. We need to correct that. Or, maybe it was something that was done intentionally. Maybe you found that, they had 4 terabytes on site or on-prem, but you realized that it was actually 4 terabytes provisioned and only 1.5 terabytes used. So you guys only had to provision a 2 terabyte disk, and now your organization is able to reap that benefit. So, sometimes it's things that are, again, in your favor, but we just want to still be aware of those. And that's where that quote comes in handy. Again, it gives us the ability to run that estimated versus deployed and quickly see what we're doing or what we're looking at. And then step two is, or part two of this rather, is making sure we gather user feedback. So, metrics may look great. Maybe CPU's not getting hit, RAM's not getting hit, but if the user experience isn't good, then there's still something else we need to look at, something else we maybe need to tailor, maybe even it's just a local network, but gathering that user feedback is extremely important. Without that feedback, it's really hard to set anything, including auto scaling, all of the metrics that we build out, we need their input so we can identify the best way to cost and performance optimize those. You're going to want access to your customer tenant and your customer subscription. Part of the reason we say that is there are things like checking and reserved instances, Azure Hybrid benefit, even being able to just look at the cost analysis tab and the most recent Azure invoice can be very important. And that's the same thing with access to the distributor portal. In order for us to go take action and actually audit that, we did purchase our Azure Hybrid benefit, then we'll need access to those portals. So that brings us into step two. Again, this is kind of what I had talked about initially there. So comparing that quote to the provisioned environment. So, when we compare that quote, there's a few different things that we really want to take a look at. One of the biggest things, of course, is just your VM instance size. So, your desktops and your servers, are they right sized? Do we need to have a DC with 4 cores if that's all it's doing? Probably not. We can bump that down to maybe a burstable series. And then again, on the flip side of that, we're also performance optimizing. So if we see that there's maybe 10 people on a 4-core machine and CPUs hitting 90, 100% pretty frequently, well, then we're going to also take the same opportunity to right size those in the opposite direction. Another thing we look at, right, is autoscale. So autoscale is very important. It's one of the biggest cost-saving measures that we have. And, it's one of the things that we have, our proprietary logic that we've built outside of native Azure. So I think autoscaling with Nerdio is extremely important, and not just autoscaling VMs. You can autoscale backend servers if that's something that you're interested in, application servers. You can autoscale Azure files. So if you have an Azure storage account running premium running premium, you can both scale those up and down. And with the most recent iteration of FS Logics, you can now do profile shrinking. So being able to shrink that container size becomes really important as you're able to shave costs when users start shrinking their own profiles as well. So then, of course, we're going to hit this again. You'll probably hear this still a few more times yet throughout the presentation today, but Azure Hybrid Benefit and reserved instances. So once we have audited our VM instances and we're sure that we have everything right-sized, we go again and we triple check. Do we need RIs? And sometimes you're going to be using a combination of autoscale and reserved instance. And then also ensuring that you have, again, Azure Hybrid Benefit. So keep in mind, Azure Hybrid Benefit is one of those things that's technically just on the honor system. When you check the box as you spin up a VM, you automatically get the discounted rate. It is on you. You're responsible to go purchase the server pack from the CSP portal. Now, nobody wants to get audited. Microsoft, could audit you or your client, though, and then we have to reach out to insurance, and it's a whole ordeal. So very important that when utilizing AHB, that we're running through this process and ensuring that we actually have everything in place so that we're compliant with Microsoft. Backup retention. So this is one, sometimes I'll see backups, again, we mentioned backups being potentially a simple thing, but it's so simple that sometimes people can easily overlook things. You might want to have different backup retention policies. Some things you may need to back up hourly, like if you're backing up an actual file path, if you're backing up VHDXs or, some like a golden image, for example, that's probably only something that needs to be done daily, maybe weekly. But making sure that we're auditing that backup retention is important. Just making sure it's happened too many times that I can tell you we've had a partner come to us and unfortunately backup was enabled, but it was enabled for daily and they needed it to be more of a 4-hour backup or whatever the use case is. So just, of course, auditing that backup retention is very important. VPN gateways is another unfortunate one that I see people lose quite a bit of money on. It's an easy fix to make, but the basic VPN is only roughly $29 a month, depending on your region. VPN Gateway 1 goes up to $150, and then $350, $400 for Gateway 2. So sometimes people will quote Gateway 1, basic, and then deploy a Gateway 1 or a Gateway 2. The other thing that I see happen is sometimes somebody will put like a Gateway 1 or a Gateway 2 up to do their migration. But after the migration, they plan to switch down to basic, but that never occurs. So again, just another reason why coming in here on a regular cadence and making sure that you're checking your environment for accuracy is very important. And then I kind of touched on Azure files a little bit above, but this is just referencing it as well. Disks can be expensive, especially when we start to get to the P series or the premium disk. So there can be a couple $100 difference between a P60 and an E60. So that brings us into step 3. When we're doing the machine auditing, we want to make sure that these VMs are sized and versioned correctly. And so when I say sized and versioned correctly, we kind of talked about right sizing, but we didn't mention versioning. So some of you, if you've been working in Azure for a while, you're familiar that they have, V2, V3, V4, V5 machines. These versions of machines come out on average every 6 to 12 months. And they really relate to a generation of hardware for both CPU, RAM, that's in the Azure data center. So if you're somebody who's running a V3, and I'll tell you again that this is another, not to pick on the NFA folks, but anybody who still or has been running NFA, Nerdio for Azure, one of our old product, I can almost guarantee it. I place bets, $10 bets that you are going to see a V3 machine in here. And now a V3 machine is 9 times out of 10 more expensive than a V5. And you're going to get about 20% performance moving from a V3 to a V5. So just by moving to a more modern hardware infrastructure, you're able to get often free or sometimes even cheaper performance or cheaper cost, but better performance. I know some of our partners last year, they went through and they were able to build really goodwill with the client. Even, they bumped them up from V3 to V5. The client noticed an extreme speed difference, and right away they asked, what's this going to cost us now that we're experiencing better speeds and better performance? We know you gave us more CPU, and the MSP was able to say nothing. This was a free cost. We were able to do this just by being proactive at monitoring your versions, and we were able to give you some free costs. So again, great way to build goodwill with your client base. So we talked about latest version. So some of the ways that I go ahead and I peek at, or the way that I identify that a machine is right-sized, there's third-party tools, your logic monitors, your RMM tool, which is an example in this photo, even just task managers, the old tried and true great method for being able to identify what a machine's doing in the middle of production and where those resources are at. Another thing is they do have Azure Monitor, so just built in directly to Azure. If you go click on your VM, you'll be able to see some live and historical data in there as well. So another thing that we can talk about with the VM sizes is AMD versus Intel. So when we talk AMD versus Intel, not much of a difference in terms of performance. Both of them in each generation come at the same clock speed. The real difference to me is AMD is about 3 to 5 cents cheaper per hour. And then other than the fact that AMD is a little bit cheaper, it really comes down to if you have any sort of application or product that you're running in your stack that requires, that is better optimized for one chipset or the other. But what's nice is in Azure, of course, you do have that flexibility. So if you're trying to cost optimize, and you have no reason or no specific optimizations you need Intel for, you could look at running AMD and again, go the cost optimization route. Now, if you have a GPU product or some sort of, oftentimes it's like engineering or CAD software that I see this with. But if you needed Intel, you can do that and optimize in the performance regard as well. Last consideration here is, oops, sorry, jumping ahead on you. Does anybody need a GPU? So like I kind of mentioned, CAD workloads, engineering workloads, architecture, these are becoming more and more common. I'd say I'm honestly starting to quote out 2-3 of these a week. That industry is kind of taking the cloud by storm. And I think it's because we have the ability to do exactly what we're talking about here in step 3. We can right size and we can kind of shift things as needed to make sure that they have the best machine possible as an engineer. Oops. All right, so step 4. This is where we're really starting to take action at this point. So, if something was mismatched as we were reviewing in step 3, well, now we need to go through and if intentionally mismatched, like we talked about, say you found that they had more data than you initially discovered. Well, then what I recommend doing, or what we at Nerdio recommend doing, is going in and updating your quote inside of the cost estimator. And this gives you a reference point going forward so that A, what their spend should be, and then B, 6 months, a year from now, when you do another Azure business review proactively for this org, you now have a good quote to kind of reference and do the same thing. Now, same process, right? If you intentionally changed anything between that 6 months from your last review, you'd want to go ahead and update the quote and just kind of keep that cycle going, right? Now, if not intentionally mismatched, we found that unfortunately one of the technicians made a mistake during the deployment stage, then we would go ahead and make those appropriate changes. So as the note says at the bottom, we want to pay attention. Keep in mind disk flips, machine resizes. A lot of these actions can actually restart the VM or cause a blip in production. So just make sure that as you're doing this, building that goodwill, we're not taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Make sure we're coordinating all of our changes with our partners or with our clients. So step 5 goes a little bit deeper into auto scaling. So auto scaling is I mentioned this at the beginning, right? When a lot of our partners, as they first deploy an environment live, they utilize the CPU trigger for auto scale. And part of that is because you don't necessarily know all of the user habits and how they're logging in quite yet, and what their performance metrics look like. So once you've had 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month to be live, that's when we like to go into auto scaling. In Nerdio's auto scale, under auto scale, and then there's a history section. So that's what we're looking at the screenshot here in this graph. This graph is letting us know, it lines up the times that people log in or the times that machines are actually scaling in and out with the events that cause those. So whether it's a performance trigger, a user trigger, whatever the case may be, you're able to line that information up here and quickly tell what's going on with your auto scale. Now then, based off this information, we can look at, do we need to change our base capacity? For anybody who's new and isn't familiar with these terms, base capacity in Nerdio's auto scale means that those are going to be the machines that are on or not on rather, but created and available for you to turn on as needed. So if you have a base capacity of 5, for example, and a minimum capacity of 2, that would mean that at any given time, 2 machines are on 24/7, while 3 are available for Nerdio to just turn on, and they'll be in that pool in about 60 seconds. What this burst is referring to, and actually here, I just realized I don't have my pointer on. What burst is referring to, burst means that effectively if the base capacity gets filled and the trigger is met for auto scale, we will actually create a machine, or the inverse of that, right? We can actually delete a machine as well if we find that we don't need the resource. So that's the difference between base. Base are going to be created and ready to be turned on, while burst are getting created on the fly once the base capacity is full. We then have triggers. So triggers are going to be all of the different metrics that we can utilize to set up our auto scale. So we have CPU, RAM, average active sessions, available sessions, and user-driven as all different triggers that we can use. One of my personal favorite triggers is user-driven because it is exactly as it sounds. You could leave it so that users, when they log in, they're actually the trigger that powers on the session host. So when somebody logs in, it powers on, and then after they log out, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you set the user-driven trigger to, it'll actually just go ahead and turn the machine off after the last person logs out. So again, user-driven really is just based off user habits, and user-driven a lot of the time gets used in conjunction with pre-staging. So pre-staging is going to say, instead of waiting for those user-driven machines to get turned on from staff, I'm going to say I know that 8 people need to be on, or 8 machines need to be on bright and early to handle this accommodation. And Nerdio will go ahead and turn on however many machines you put in that pre-stage section. And then the other cool thing is, of course, you can pre-stage multiple days of the week. So if you need 10 machines on every morning, Monday through Friday, but only 2 on the weekends, you can set those schedules and do that as needed. I'm trying to think another thing. I wanted to mention that, another cool thing about the auto scale and how you can dial it in as well is just keeping in mind that you can have multiple host pools with multiple different auto scale settings. So, you maybe have a personal pool where power users get assigned a 1-to-1 VM. And maybe those folks you do user-driven for. So when they log in, their machine starts. When they log out, the machine's off. But for maybe the base or the general population pool, you could go ahead and just give them a little bit more stringent auto scale policy, if you will, and be a little little more meticulous with it and really drive cost savings. So just wanted to point out as well, you can get creative with the amount of pools and how you want to go and apply that auto scale. Again, we kind of talked about this earlier, but this is really driving home what that process is and how we do RI and AHB RI and Azure Hybrid Benefit verification. So you have to log into your distributor portal. And I shouldn't say that. So Pax8 and Ingram now both allow you to do what's called self-service RIs. I might be biased, but personally, just because of that feature, those are my two favorite CSPs. But you're able to go in, you can go to reservations inside of Azure, inside of your customer subscription, and then you can go ahead and just purchase, cancel, exchange your reserved instances. For some of the other CSPs, it's a little bit more of a process. You have to go into the CSP portal, and from that portal, you go ahead and you purchase or exchange or cancel that RI. Now, part of what we want to do here is when we jump into this portal, if we haven't purchased them, great. We'll go ahead and we will purchase them. If we have purchased them, we want to be sure that we're making that they are matched. And same thing while we do the purchase, right? So, for example, there's a machine that's an E8S V5. If you have that machine running, but you accidentally purchase a reserved instance for an E8S V4, what's going to happen is, unfortunately, you're going to pay the reserved instance for the V4 at the discounted rate that you agreed with Microsoft. But for your V5, then you're also going to pay the pay-as-you-go rate and effectively be paying full price on that second VM. So you need to be very careful. That's how Microsoft gets you, right? They give us a big discount when utilizing RIs, but there's some catch-22s in there where if we're not careful, it can really burn us as the MSP. So another thing too, just as I'm reading the slide, I kind of forgot that region is also important. Just want to point that out. I've seen people, unfortunately, grab a reserved instance for West US when they needed East US. AHB, or Azure Hybrid Benefit, and I apologize, I should have explained Azure Hybrid Benefit for those that maybe aren't familiar. Azure Hybrid Benefit, what it really is it's a weird way of Microsoft saying that if you spin up a Windows Server operating system inside of Azure, that they're going to automatically lease you that operating system to make sure you're compliant. Well, that's all fine and well and very nice of them to do so. I don't like admin overhead and having to make sure I go purchase licenses. However, it is the most expensive way to get your Windows operating system license. So we at Nerdio recommend, unfortunately, taking advantage of the cost savings and dealing with the admin overhead and then purchasing the cores from your CSP. So again, sorry to clarify, but really what AHB is going into a CSP, Pax8, SureWeb, purchasing the correct amount of licenses for the amount of cores on a machine, and making sure that that's compliant. But again, you're going to reap about 50% off of the license fees when you do it this way versus just leasing that operating system directly from Microsoft. Sorry, I think running into a little bit of that Wi-Fi lag I had initially. Let's see if I can get this slide to move. There we go. All right, so step 7. As we mentioned before, I want to hit home on this because backups are one of those things that as IT people and as an MSP, we feel are likely automatic. But I can tell you as somebody who audits environments and countless environments for countless MSPs, this is not always the case. It's not uncommon for me to come across not just one device not being backed up, but unfortunately sometimes a whole stack. So again, audit your backups. Make sure that not only are they turned on, but as we talked about earlier, that the frequency and retention are set properly. Another thing would be, I would like to see everybody starting to adopt even like doing a backup restore. So I think a lot of folks know that the backups are in place, but never do a test restore. I think it's a good habit to get into. First, it makes sure that the systems are functional, that the backups are working, but it also helps to make sure that you and your team know the process, that you're not fumbling, that you know exactly how to quickly and efficiently actually pull that backup. And everything's reversible with a good backup. I know that's a kind of a cliche, but it really is the truth. There's people that come back from ransomware attacks and everything just simply because of a good backup. So I guess one thing to note too, if you've used Nerdio before, or sorry, if you were using Nerdio recently, you may have noticed that we came out with hourly backups. Prior to the last 2 months, you could only do daily backups within the Nerdio product. But now you can do hourly, and not to hype you on something that's coming soon, but as of June 15th, I believe is the estimated release date. We're coming out with a 4.3 version of Nerdio, and they're releasing a ton of much more granular control over how to set the backup policy, the frequency, the retention. And then another big piece with backup that I'm excited for that's coming is file level restores. So again, not to hype you on new features, but coming June 15th in version 4.3. So here's another thing that we do. During our ABR, we like to review some of the lesser known features of both, Nerdio, AVD, Microsoft as a whole. We find that sometimes utilizing these features themselves and just kind of utilizing a different workflow can sometimes reduce costs or increase performance in itself. So some of the things we talk about or look at would be like application masking. One moment. So application masking is, instead of having multiple pools, maybe some people will have a pool for their general use case of staff, and maybe they'll split the QuickBooks or the accounting team off to another host pool. Well, that requires having a new set of machines, more license or more resources. If you could maybe just put the accounting people on the same pool, put QuickBooks on there and hide the data, then maybe you could get away with it. So that's what app masking is, right? It really is. It's allowing you to put the accounting folks, every department on the same machine, and you can actually hide the application from them with app masking. Now, this is different if you're an admin who's used to NTFS permissions and just setting up deny perms, or like using a group policy to roll out icons. This is actually going to prevent them, if they go to see program files or navigate to any aspect of that application in the machine, they're not going to be able to see it or interact. It truthfully hides every component of an application. So if you did QuickBooks, for example, they would not see the QuickBooks icon. They wouldn't even be able to go to programs, like uninstall program, and see it in that list. It hides every aspect. So one thing to consider, again, sometimes you can put more people on the same machine if you're trying to do it for compliance reasons, and hide the apps instead of splitting them out into different machines. So AVD session host disk flip. Again, if you're a partner, you're probably aware of this setting. And if not, this is something that is not in native Azure. So we have a way that we kind of flip the disk, if you will. So if you're running a premium SSD, when your machine turns off, Nerdio will tell Azure or trick Azure into thinking it's an HDD. So you get a reduced rate, and that saves about $5 to $10 per VM per month that uses that feature and auto scales. We have published applications. So published applications is something where, when I say published app, it's more like a remote app. So if anybody's coming from an RDS world or Citrix and you've done remote apps before, that's what we mean by a published application. And sometimes what we find is, say you're doing a full QuickBooks firm, this group that uses nothing but QuickBooks basically, and you want to keep QuickBooks in Azure just for the sake of security and patching. Well, you can do so with published applications, and by only serving them up the QuickBooks app and not letting them use the browser and all the additional features that a full desktop brings, you can actually keep the overhead or the resource consumption way down by only publishing that one app. So again, depending on the customer use case, sometimes we'll have firms that are doing like a shared QuickBooks experience, and they let a bunch of small, medium businesses in to do their own QuickBooks work. And oftentimes they will just serve them up only the QuickBooks app because that's all that they need. So just something to consider there. I did cover Azure Files Autoscale earlier today, but again, that's the ability to dynamically expand and shrink your Azure Files container. And then we also have scripted actions. So this is something that the Nerdio team, you can build out your own, but we also have a bunch of pre-canned scripted actions. We have uninstall and install of all the big security tooling, RMM tooling, Sophos, SentinelOne, ConnectWise, Kaseya, Blackpoint. And then you can also create your own. So what scripted actions are used for, they're used to simply run anything against a host pool. And, I shouldn't just say a host pool. You can run it against session hosts, desktop images, But anytime that you need to schedule a script to run against a VM. Step 9 is going to be getting the house in order. And when we say the house, we're just talking about, at the MSP layer of Nerdio, there's some things that we kind of mentioned earlier, but I'm going to hit on it again. Notifications, workflows, RBAC. These are all things that are really used to keep your Azure and your Nerdio both costing and just security-wise, making sure nobody's deleting things they shouldn't be. And then the global RDP and FS logics, these are settings that I think people don't realize are there. They kind of skip over sometimes. So if you have, as an IT admin, a set of RDP preferences that you push out and you push that out to all of your clients where you allow them to, maybe no clients can use drives or printers or whatever the case is. If you have a global set of settings that you'd like to push out, you can create that at your layer and then assign those to clients as needed. Same thing with FS logics. If you're finding that you're creating those same settings time and time again, instead of recreating them inside of Nerdio at the account level, recreate it at the global level once, and then you'll never have to push it out or have to manually create it for the customer. Same thing with global views. This is something that recently came out. I think Vadim maybe announced this himself at NerdioCon earlier this year. But global views are the ability to set up anything really, like your backup devices, backup dashboard, session hosts, servers, and really pull those into a global view across all of your clients and across all of your Microsoft tenants. And that's really it. That leaves us at just review all the things. We really want to go top to bottom and look under every rock to see what we can find and what we can identify to cost save and optimize for you. That is really all I had. We have a section and some time for question and answers. I think we still have 5-10 minutes left. If anybody has anything for me. Sorry, I haven't been checking chat, but I'm taking a look now to see if I can answer anybody's questions here. And it looks like we're getting some of the questions answered by each other. And you're right. So Pax8 and SureWeb, most MSPs are purchasing through them because effectively they have, a really large purchasing power through Microsoft. So they're able to get a big discount on licenses and effectively pass those discounts onto you as the MSP, which then of course gets you some margin as you resell those licenses at MSRP to your client. What else we got here? Also, glad to see some friendly faces. I see Dave in the chat. Hey, Dave. I see Daryl. Hello, hello. And yeah, just to clarify, Daryl is right. AHB, sorry if I didn't clarify that, is only for server operating systems. So anytime you're having like a session host, Windows 10 or 11 multi-session, those entitlements are going to fall under the actual user's business premium, Microsoft E3, E5, but it comes through their user entitlement. Sorry, I'm trying to get Q&A, trying to get it to load for us, Omega. Sorry. There we go. Apologies. Reservations only need enough to cover 24/7. Yeah, so you're right. So what I do with that Omega is I would buy enough RIs to cover whatever you anticipate to be your 24/7 base capacity. So in the example I gave earlier, where it was 5 base, 2 machines at minimum, you would only want the 2 machines to have RIs, and then you'd reap the benefit of the other ones just scaling. Callum, we can definitely get you a recording. Bob, to your question about is this a parallel to the QBR? I would say so. I mean, I've run a few quarterly business reviews myself a few months back when I was still at my MSP, and I would say it's very similar. Although for me, the QBR was almost, a little less technical, but I think you take a lot of the information you get from that QBR and you're able to apply it here to help kind of scope and see where the right sizing is going to be going forward. So, and I think a lot of what maybe some of the stuff we talked about for an ABR, you could maybe incorporate into your QBR, right, to help gather that information at that time. When removing resources, is there a way to search for filter on? Good question, Dave. I don't know that there is, but I'll take that as feedback because that's a good piece to be able to do, or a good way to be able to filter. So yeah, I'll take that as feedback. Let me go back to the actual chat. So I'm kind of bouncing between Q&A and chat here, trying to make sure I'm staying on top of things. To speak, John, to what you're talking about, I think for exchanges, I think what Microsoft's doing, if you guys look at the documentation for cancellations and exchanges for self-service RIs, what Microsoft intends to do, it seems, is January of 2024, you're no longer going to be able to do an exchange on a reserved instance. You are going to continue to be able to cancel. They still, at this time, haven't identified if they are going to start charging 12% at the time of the cancellation or not. They've always reserved the right to start, but they've never done it in the past 5-6 years. So I'm not sure if they're going to start doing that, but they do still stay in that. Yeah, Omega. Sorry, not to switch gears, but yeah, it is super easy. The only caveat is if it's an AMD V4, it has a temp disk. So a little bit of work you might have to do to move it to a V5, or you'd have to just put it on a temp disk machine. But I can drop you my calendar link too. If you want to schedule time with me, we can take a further look. But yeah, sorry, to your point, John. So the exchanges are no longer going to be available starting January 2024. You're going to be able to cancel, however, still. And I think if you look at the documentation, I don't know if it's still there, but they had mentioned at one point that each reservation that you purchased before January of 2024, you were still going to get grandfathered in for one exchange. I don't know if they've changed their verbiage on that yet or not, but yeah. Here. Yeah, so I would say continue to use RIs. And one thing I didn't note too, and I maybe should have, so keep in mind with that RI and the cancellation thing, if Microsoft starts charging 12% for us to cancel our reserved instances, the average ROI on a reserved instance is only 3 months. So even if you need to cancel, as long as you put a client live and they have that machine up for 3 months, you'll have already ROI'd generally on the cancellation fee. So Yeah, so even in that article, to be clear, those changes, they're getting rid of exchange, but again, they're not getting rid of cancellation. So something I think that we're still going to be able to take advantage of. And also, again, keep in mind that you do get one more cancellation that you're grandfathered in for as well. I'm glad to hear that you thought it was a good session. And I agree. I think, to be honest, a lot of these components in here, I had a hard time myself, truthfully, trying to keep it high level and not go too deep into some of the technical stuff. So yeah, but again, for anybody in the session too, we have our sales team, and that's what we're here for, is quoting, walking you through all of these things. You have your PSM, or we have PSMs, and then we have the sales engineering team. And if you get a time on any one of our calendars, we'd be glad to give you a more personal walkthrough of any of these topics and any of the questions you might be having. That's a fantastic idea, John. Let's do it. Let's see if it'll let me do it. I'll try and do it on the fly. We'll see.
Jordan, do you want to drop your calendar link in here just in case anyone does have some follow-up?
Yeah, that's a great idea too. Let me grab that here. Yeah, sorry, I normally have it on the Q&A page. I'll make sure I put it there for next time too. All my contact info. There's my calendar link. So again, if you want to schedule, feel free to just drop something on my calendar directly. I'm looking to find if I can get a poll going on the fly, because I think, John, fantastic idea. Maybe we start pulling these into a little bit more deeper dives. Yeah, John, if you have a licensing question surrounding like Windows licensing and AHB, I'd be curious. Again, next time it comes up, definitely feel free to schedule time with one of us at Nerdio, and I'll see if we can help you navigate that with your CSP and see if it makes it a little bit easier for you. Apologies that it was such a tough experience. All right, everybody. Well, I do have to drop. But it was a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for the time and taking time out of your day to spend your time with me. I hope you learned something valuable, and looking forward to hopefully connecting with all of you again.